Good to see everyone today. My name is Gene Meneray. I'm with the Ella Project, a artist services organization and pro bono program here in New Orleans, Louisiana, and we're excited to share information about our new Rampart guide, a guide to musician readiness and estate planning. It's been supported with generous support from the Emily Hall Tremaine Foundation. Thank you to them for their continued support of our program. What we're going to do today is walk through the rationale for creating this document, how we think it can be used by organizations in Louisiana and sometimes not in Louisiana too, and we'll get to that as we get along through the presentation. I'm thrilled to be joined by two of my favorite people, Ashlye Keaton, my co-founder here at the Ella Project, a longtime intellectual property or entertainment attorney, and also professor at Tulane Law School and has run our legal program here at Ella Project for about 20 years. And Elizabeth Meneray, and you may notice we have similar last names. Elizabeth is a longtime family attorney here in the city as well. And of course, a volunteer for our project, speaker at forums for the Louisiana State Bar Association, Small and Solo Practitioners Conference, and was recently a judicial officer for the 24th Court in Jefferson Parish, working in matters of family law. A real expert in this field and the principal author of our Rampart Guide. So we're thrilled to have both of y'all joining us today and taking us through sort of the rationales behind this and why we think it was important and how we think it could help. So good to see everybody.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, and it's good to see everyone out there.
Absolutely. So one of the things is a pro bono program, and we work with low to moderate income artists and musicians and focus in matters of intellectual property. And we do a lot of seminars as well. And one thing that we've always tried to find a way to address is that, we have, especially in a town like New Orleans, that has a lot of legacy artists, and we refer to that as musicians with older catalogs of music. Some of them have been quite successful, some of them not necessarily. But figuring out what to do with that intellectual property, as Ashlye will get into, one of the things that we always discuss, copyright is 70 years after the life of the artist. So 70 years is a long time after the artist dies, and that copyright doesn't disappear. But a lot of times musicians can lead complicated lives and things aren't always taken care of on the front end. It's always a challenge in any sort of pro bono program to fix things on the back end. So our goal is to always push the information forward. One of the things that we found, though, is unlike with some other sort of what we'd look at as evergreen topics of, here's what you need to do to license your music for a film, or here's what you need to do to acquire a trademark. This is often information that people don't think about until the moment that it is at hand, and it's not when you're necessarily going to rush out and go visit a workshop on this topic. So our goal here was to create a document with instructions written for the common person, not a very hardcore legal document, but with good legal information. Not a substitute for legal advice. This is absolutely an educational document. And also to include some of the basic forms that one could use when going through this. As we've said, there's been a lot of times where people will end up calling us. Well, my husband, my brother, my wife died 20 years ago. I heard a song on the radio. What can I do? And so the goals of Rampart was really to be able to get that information in a easily digestible form in a time where people could use that information. And I think that we've succeeded on it. And it's a project that we're going to continue to roll out with further videos, topics on specific issues that we're going to discuss. But we really needed was a hardcore guide to begin that process. Ashlye, you have done a lot of work in this area over the years, and discussing with you was one of the impetuses for creating this program in the first place. So I wanted to just talk about some of the things that you've seen in L.L. Project or your private practice, where you've seen if this kind of document had existed before, maybe some things could have gone a little bit smoother for the artist and for their descendants.
Sure, absolutely, because we really are couching this project in terms of the importance of preserving one's legacy. A musician's legacy is very important, not just to the individual, but in a place like New Orleans and other communities worldwide. it's part of it's part of, our collective identity, right? And therefore, it's absolutely critical that musicians prepare for the way that they want their names, their contributions, their stories to be told after their past. There are many cases where legacies have been continued by via stories that are told and content that is pulled together by the masses in a very good way. But there are a lot of legacies that are lost, and that's very unfortunate. And worse, there are legacies that leave the living with a misrepresentation of the life that was lived, right? And that is kind of a nightmare scenario. The last thing a musician wants is to leave a legacy that's not accurate, right? And so the idea was to really empower musicians to continue their storytelling, from the afterlife, if you will. And in my practice, early on, like one of the very first cases that I had to work on, that I had the privilege to work on in many ways, but was very challenging, had to do with a musician that you all, might not know, but I mean, I would say that, in many ways, he was kind of like the Elvis Presley of New Orleans. He was one of the most iconic musicians that came out of New Orleans, especially in the pioneering rock and roll scene. And, he wrote songs that were hits, like one of Jimi Hendrix's biggest hits. When he passed away, he was one of the very few musicians who's been laid in state. And when you go to someone's funeral and Paul McCartney sends flowers and Eric Clapton says, "Thank you for writing my songs, my hit songs." And, I mean, you have like all the luminaries there. I mean, this guy he had so much content that was so important, not just to our city, not just to his estate, but worldwide. I mean, this influenced generations of musicians and consumers, people like you and me. And so it was absolutely critical that, we ensure that people continue to have access to this great, content content of work and this musical catalog. And it was very complicated. It was there. This particular musician, he's not the first and won't be the last, passed away without a will. And when someone has you know has the kind of music of that caliber and of that volume without having it organized and without identifying who your heirs are, then there are some obvious challenges that arise. We had to perform DNA tests on heirs that came out of the woodwork that alleged that they were that this person was their father. And we had to, at one point, I had to call someone in Kansas and tell a 54-year-old woman that, the person she thought was her father her whole life was in fact not her father. This can get really hairy, and this is what I would think that most musicians want to avoid. But we had to do that. We had to, go through these processes in order to ensure that this person's content again was available for the public, which is of course goes to ensuring that that society is continues to be enriched as a whole because of the art that we have available to us, and of course music is part of that, and again very much part of New Orleans specific identity. And so, these are just, some of the challenges that can arise, and it highlights, why it's so important for people to have their catalogs organized. I work with another musician locally who has authorized me to discuss his content in detail. He's the vice president of our board and very supportive of this project for many reasons. Among them, because he's worked with numerous musicians who've passed away without being organized, who have had their legacies kind of shelved, right? And their musical projects shelved because of the lack of any real real way to navigate their rights and interests, once they became deceased. And so I've been working with him on identifying his own musical assets, which is it can be daunting, but it can be done. If musicians begin to organize their content while they're living, then this is something that the heirs will benefit from when they become deceased, and make it much more manageable for their rights to be administered, and ensure that in turn that their legacies are preserved in a way that the stories, and in such a way that their stories are reflective of the life that was indeed lived. And so, Craig Klein, who is our vice president, is a member of, well, he's a musician with Preservation Hall Jazz Band, which you all may have heard of. It's a world-renowned uh, jazz band and club located in the heart of the New Orleans French Quarter. He's a member of several brass bands. He's a member of a Grammy award-winning jazz ensemble and another trombone ensemble, and among many other projects that he's done. He also has his own solo projects. And so, what I've advised Craig to do is, in advance of actually preparing the document that Liz is going to speak to you at length in a few minutes, is to get his content organized. And that is basically to create a discography. And so what Craig is.
Actually, that I just want to jump in, and because
Mhm.
we have it on the screen here. So you actually did a great step-by-step write-up, which is in the Rampart guide that everyone can find, and it runs right here. As you see right there, all the
Right.
steps. So let people know exactly what we'd be looking for here as we go through these steps one through.
Absolutely. So because Craig is a songwriter, the first thing he needs to do is to identify all of the musical configurations that he's been in, so that he can identify which of his songs and which of his recordings are associated with which configuration. So he has to first identify, all of the bands he's been in, all of the solo work that he's done. And that includes everything from Preservation Hall to the Storyville Stompers to Bonorama, and all of the other. There's numerous projects that he's been involved in. Then what he needs to do is he needs to make a list of all of his musical compositions, which are his songs, and all of his sound recordings. And because music has two copyrights, one in the musical composition and one in the sound recording. So he needs to make two separate lists for all of his music that he's created. Now, sometimes the owner of the song and the recording are the same, and sometimes they're not. And so, for instance, if Craig recorded a cover of someone else's song, he would not have an interest in the song. He would just have an interest in the recording. So his list needs to reflect that, so that his heirs are able to manage this. Otherwise, especially for those who inherit a catalog and don't know anything about the music business, it's beyond daunting, because it's like learning how to administer an estate and learning the music business at the same time for the first time. And trust me, no one wants to do that. And so for each music title, he has to identify whether and what amount of interest he owns in the song and the recording. So if he ever wrote a song with collaborators, which, two or more authors, then it would be helpful for Craig while he's alive to use what we call a split sheet. And that's another document that we have prepared and we have provided to you as a resource. In the split sheet outlines the interests that each songwriter and or performer in a sound recording has in the respective song or recording. So if there are two or more songwriters, the songwriters list their names, the memberships, whether they're a member of ASCAP, BMI, or CSAC, which is a performing rights organization. It's important to document that too. And then, what percentage of the song they wrote. So it's important to do that when you're living, because if you wait until you die, then, I mean, it's kind of like the difference between, you know, getting a prenup or, duking it out, after you get divorced, right? I mean, it's a lot easier to have the roadmap ahead of time. And so we provided that as a resource so that it's a helpful tool in getting organized and getting prepared. Um, and so once, Craig organizes his content, his musical compositions and his recordings, then he has to identify any brands that he might have. And so any band name is a brand. And, as part of that process, I've advised him to pull together any operating agreements he might have with the band and make sure that, those are attached to his discography to aid his heirs in determining what kind of assets he has. Because if the band is selling merchandise, Craig may be entitled to merchandise, or his family may be entitled to revenues earned in connection with the merchandise. If someone puts Craig on a Jazz Fest poster, an image of Craig on a Jazz Fest poster, which happens, there's nothing like a musician dying to generate an image on a Jazz Fest poster, which boosts sales, right? Then his heirs are entitled to the revenue generated from that, and that's money. That's big money, actually. So it's important to document all of that. Any businesses that he has with, whether it's an LLC or if he has a, informal partnership or what have you, needs to document all of that. And, all of the revenue that comes from the music, all of these bands, they may have different distributors. Some of these bands may be signed to record labels. Some of them may have publishers. Some of them may be operating on more of a DIY scale. And so maybe they have a distribution agreement with CD Baby or TuneCore or DistroKid. It's important to document all of that because the heirs are going to need to contact the distributors to let them know where the interests need to be distributed, and they need to be able to provide the third parties that are privy to contracts with Craig with all of the documentation that is needed, that Liz will get into soon when I stop talking, in order to be able to receive and to collect the revenue, right? Because I mean, legacy and storytelling is important, but I, I I'm sure that any musician would want to know that the money that they're earning after they pass away is not escheating to the state, is not going purely to the record label, but actually going to their family or to whomever else is, important to them. And so that's why it's important to identify all those revenue sources, because in the music industry there are so many. It's not just from album sales. It's not just from, gigs performed. It's not just from merchandise. We're talking about, broadcast rights and licensing and there's just too much to it's too complicated to get into, but we've covered it in our guide. And so and we've talked about the right of publicity, and I think that it's a good time for me to pass the baton to Liz, but just to sum it up, it's really important for the musician to make sure that that in the discography and all of the in their inventory, that all any and all documentation that they have that could be helpful be provided, because that will help light the path. It'll help light the way for the heirs to begin and and go through the process of 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 obtaining what is it called, Liz? Possession of the estate, and then managing it, and in some cases convincing third parties to help manage that, right, or hiring them to do so. So anyway, thank you all. I hope that was helpful, and I will let Liz take the mic.
Yeah, no, this is extremely helpful. And I really like how you wrote this up, where it really goes through the specifics, but it's written in a way that I think anyone is going to be able to understand. And there are some steps, but you can see here, there are steps that if you take it sort of, one bite at a time, you can get everything prepared and you can have all your records, all your, not records as in recording, but all your records as far as information that you want to keep on file ready to go. And that's one of the other things that we wanted to bring into this conversation, all of us these days are dealing with issues of natural disaster and loss. One of the things is that you create this document, but you want to make sure that, it's something that you have access to at all times. And so we were happy to work with a graduate student at Tulane who was able to put together just some other good information about protecting your information, making sure that it's stored effectively in the cloud or removable hard drives. We know a lot of people after Katrina in New Orleans that lost paper documents and recordings as well, just because no one was expecting the flood that happened. We also know that that was 20 years ago, and that there have been significant advances made, and those advances are available to everyone. And so, similarly, I think we've got a nice little guide on how to protect your information, make sure that it's available at all times. And then that's another thing too. We never really were prepared previously for issues of social media afterlife, and that's something that has cropped up, especially in the last 5 years. There's all these accounts, there are all these things that are out there. I know it can be confusing and complicated for anyone, whether they be an artist or not, with a loved one's social media existence still floating out there without any control. So we're able to go into those and how that can be dealt with step by step as well, which I think is certainly going to be helpful for everyone. And I think you'll notice a theme over this is that the idea is to create these step by step processes, documents, and checklists. And Liz, when you were working through the estate plan, I know that that was a big part of it as well. We have, I think, a really effective will preparation checklist that I know you and Ellen and Lee all worked on designing, and there are other things as well. So I'd like you to just think about taking us through when you looked at and when you look at especially clients who are coming to you, they're looking to prepare things for their legacy. They know that they have product that's going to continue in intellectual property, but we're not talking necessarily people with millions of dollars and massive estates, but they all have some legacy that they want to leave. And I wanted you to see if you want to talk through that process and what you think people can take out of this document and put their own thought processes going.
Thanks so much. And thanks, Ashley. I mean, the part that you put together is to me really the heart of this document. The meat of it is the hard work that goes into preparing responsibly so that your estate can pass along to future generations, can be preserved in the way that you want it to be. And I think that control is a big part of this. Louisiana law has definitely has routes by which your property, your creations will travel if you fail to plan. The plan is set into the law, and if you do nothing, there's definitely a way that things will go. So having control over it and being able to say while you're alive what you want your legacy to be, who you want to control it after you're gone, and what that looks like. That's really why we put this document together. And the first sentence of this second step of the Rampart Guide it really speaks to that. What is an estate plan if not a collection of the information that you need to speak for you when you cannot anymore? So it starts with those inventories that Ashlye talked about, identifying the work that you have accumulated over your lifetime, your interests in financial gain from and revenues from that work, future earnings that you expect, and licensing and things that can come, for years after your passing. And so that legacy plan is what I call it, essentially identifying that information, creating the discography, doing the split sheets, and putting that all in a centralized location. That's one of several documents that you'd want to make up your estate plan. And so what I've put together is a list of documents in addition to that legacy plan that you want to have together, again, to speak for you when you cannot. Things like a living will to determine what happens to you physically when you're not able to determine your medical care. We call that an advance directive here in Louisiana. Powers of attorney that designate someone to act on your behalf with regard to your financial affairs, or to open your mail, pay your taxes, deal with your affairs as a business owner, as an individual, during a period when you can't or no longer desire to do it for yourself. And then, probably the big daddy of them all is the last will and testament, which of course is the document where you set out not only who you are and who your family is, but what you own and how you want it distributed after your death. So we've included some forms in the Rampart guide that would allow you to organize that information, because a will document needs to be very specific. It needs to be very accurate. And the more detail you can put into it, the better the chances are that your desires will be carried forward by the people that you're entrusting to do so. And so you need to think about who you trust to carry forth your desires. You're going to want to name certain people to be in charge of this information and your directives. And so we've put together checklists and questionnaires that would prepare you to speak with an attorney if that is your desire to use an attorney. We also talk about ways that you can carry this out on your own by using methods that Louisiana law provides for to create your own will without a lawyer, with only the bare minimum requirements. And then we also talk about what happens after your death and how, what we call in Louisiana the succession, otherwise known as probate in the common law, how that works. What you can expect if you have a will, and what you can expect if you don't have a will, if you've decided to allow everything to go intestate, as we say, without a testament to direct, because your heirs and the people that you care about and the ones that you intend to inherit from you do not necessarily have a legal right to do so. And the best reason for having a will is so that you can direct who inherits and who does not. If you'd like to pull up the will checklist, we can go through some of the information that is good to amass, put into a safe place. In just the same way that Ashlye has advised her clients to pull contracts and other agreements, important papers. You're going to want to do this for general information as well. The checklist that is in the guide, starts with just your name and your date of birth, the most basic information, because you need to identify yourself. And if you have any aliases, and I guess that, is aliases for identification purposes, or perhaps for performance purposes. I know that sometimes artists will use various names. If if they're going to record, maybe outside of their regular contracts with certain record labels. That goes back probably to the dawn of recording technology, where you need to say, "Hey, I recorded as," I'm thinking of an old 1955 record that I have, where it's John Burke's. It's not Dizzy Gillespie. It's and so you need to identify the other names that you've used during your life. And you may think, well, that's elemental. But if you don't write it down, then, it could be forgotten. Um, Other things that are important to keep in mind, what I would advise is that as you're building this document, that the information that supports what you're putting in the document, that you keep it all together. So your birth certificate, if you don't no longer have a copy of your birth certificate, you're going to want to go ahead and order a certified copy from the state in which you were born. Make sure that you take care of that little detail so that your heirs don't have to, so that your executor doesn't have to, because that will slow down the process of the succession or probate in the state where you are if you can't even prove your own identity. And so you start there. You think about who you are married to, and pull any documents that you have with regard to those marriages, and especially those divorces, those deaths, however your life status changed over the years. You're going to want, that's going to go in your will, that's going to go into succession documents that are filed with the court later. We need to know who was involved with you during your life and what their legal relationship to you is or was. Also, with regard to children, who are your children? Are they children of a marriage? Are they children that you adopted? Are they children that you assumed responsibility for in life and perhaps would like to leave a legacy to, even though they don't technically have a legal relationship to you? Those children, or maybe they do have a biological relationship, but you're not on the birth certificate, or you've acknowledged them informally, as we say. If you want them included, especially if you consider that there could be an argument down the line about whether certain people are worthy or entitled to come to the estate and inherit, you're definitely going to want your wishes known about, I really do want a portion of my estate to go to this person. So again, detail is important. Putting their dates of birth down, identifying what you know about how they can be located is also important. So right there is a big chunk of information that could take some time to amass, if you don't have the documents together to do that. Another thing to consider, is who you're going to appoint to take care of your property, to carry out the directives of your will, to make sure that your legacy is handled in the way that you direct. And so that person is going to be your executor, or if it's a female, the executrix. That's what the titles we use in Louisiana. Other states may have different titles for people who do that, but essentially there are the agents that are appointed. And you're going to want primary executors appointed, but you're also going to want someone in reserve in case that person is no longer available or no longer willing to carry out those duties for you. we also have some information here for people who have young children and how you might want their needs to be met after you die, who you want to take care of them, and that sort of thing. We also talk a little bit about who you'd want to receive your property. Naturally, it's not just about inheritance, but the guide also speaks to places that may be interested in taking artifacts of your life or information that you may have amassed, depositories and archives. And so if you have special considerations like that, you're going to want to write those down. Um,
And I'll jump in there and say that I think the two pieces there are really helpful as well because one of the things we interviewed was a jazz curator at the New Orleans Jazz Museum and then also an archivist at the Tulane Jazz Archives and Special Collections. And it's important to have what you want to be able to place, but it's also important to have these conversations with the curators and museums ahead of time to find out what they would be interested in. You know, we've run into that over the years, more with visual artists, but it's certainly been a thing where they said, "Oh, well, I'd love to give all my collection to XYZ Museum of Art," but they haven't actually had those conversations with XY Museum of Art, and XY Museum of Art may not be interested in that, and that puts the heirs in a very complicated situation. So having those conversations with the curators ahead of time and finding out what they'd be interested in and what you could do to enhance their collection and make sure that it's available to the public for years, I think is always an important thing. But once you have that, now here's the opportunity to actually codify it in writing. And all these documents are available in fillable forms on our webpage at illinois.org/Rampart. So the documents can be downloaded along with the actual guide. But if you just want to go straight to the documents, they'll be there as well, which I think will be a good service to people.
Hope so. Again, if you have an estate that is complex, it contains a lot of property, intellectual or otherwise, I highly recommend that you involve a lawyer in this process, because these forms may be different for different situations, and not all of these sections are going to apply to you. And so you're going to want trusted legal advice as you're putting your plan together. I guess in terms of why you want to do this, or now, or why it's important to have a will, is that uh, you don't always know what's going to happen, what kind of disputes are going to be generated by your passing. Ashlye talked about, people coming from other states and claiming to be related to the decedent. And, if you've got any property at all, people come out of the woodwork, so to speak, to try to lay claim to what they consider their inheritance rights. But what I like to warn people about is that sometimes there are people in your life who are extremely close to you that actually do not have a legal right to inherit, that you may find surprising or disappointing. In Louisiana, same-sex couples do not, there is no immediate right to inheritance unless you're a spouse of that person. And, I did an estate for a gentleman recently, a visual artist who passed away with a will, but unmarried. He only had one remaining heir who was a brother in another state, and he lived for many years with his partner, and his partner in life, his partner in work, created art together. But without the will, this brother would have inherited 100% of this estate, and his longtime companion, to whom he was not married, would not have had any right to the property of this artist under Louisiana law. Um, I mean, as a co uh, artist, I guess, that's a different thing. But in terms of just furniture and belongings and keepsakes and things of sentimental value, he certainly had no leg to stand on, except that this gentleman had a will that was very specific and provided for his legacy.
And I,
Another,
and I,
yeah,
Go ahead. I was going to say, I think that that sort of tees us up because you see right there are things, of course, that we can look at as potential pitfalls, but if you plan effectively, then things can go really well. And I think that this is what this document is going to do, is to begin that conversation, give people the information and the tools that they're looking for, and put them in a good position when they do have to seek legal counsel, either if it's a pro bono program like ours or whatever state you might be in, or with an attorney who's working on your estate. And with that in mind, I think we've talked a lot about getting these documents together. We've talked a lot about some of the stuff that can take some time, but there are some good sides of it as well, and it's not always just avoiding disaster. So, Ashlye, there's a story that you always talk about with another New Orleans
Sure.
music legacy artist, who I think we could close off to show, like, when you do have everything together, sometimes things come out that you never really expect.
Right. You want to stop the screen share so we can storytell time?
I do indeed.
Awesome. So yeah, this was uh, after Hurricane Katrina, which, as you all know, I mean, this is a good story for this topic because it touches on preparedness and on legacy. Uh, preparing for your legacy and preparing for disaster. But um, so I represent still actually a catalog of music of 22,000 titles that was controlled by another very, very famous New Orleans musician and producer. And I represented a lot of the interest in that catalog in 2007 when my client was approached by Boots Cosmetics, which is, for those of you who don't know, and I had no idea, it's not just the number one cosmetic company in the United Kingdom. It's also like the Walgreens and CVS and Rite Aid combined. Like it's the little corner store that is everywhere. So it had kind of a large budget, right? They approached my client about using a song that just this like old, like weird song in his catalog um, for their 30-second, actually no, this was for almost a minute, and that's a big deal, holiday spot on television to be broadcast in the United Kingdom to promote their holiday campaign, right? And for those of you who may not be familiar, a sync license of that caliber to be, broadcast, throughout an entire country and, with a very large budget is is major coin, like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, which would it probably translate to a couple million today. And so they picked this song and my client came to me and he was like, they want to use this. And I was like, yeah, okay, fine. But we're kind of underwater here. Can you propose something that sounds like that will benefit the music community here? And so he chose a song that he knew would be free and clear, and that's important. Um, he chose a song that was written by Alan Toussaint and that was recorded by an artist called Ernie Cato, who we in New Orleans call the Emperor of the Universe. Ernie Cato had a bar, and there's still a bar. There's a bar to this day because of this transaction, and because the estate was in order. It's called the Mother-in-Law Lounge, and the Mother-in-Law Lounge at the time I was approached about this transaction was actually a little bit before 2007 was had just been, I mean, it was underwater for a long time and it was rotting. It was rotting and it cost a fortune to go in and, renovate these places. And it was on the verge of shutting down and that legacy being, gone forever, right? Um, Instead, we used the song, and Ernie Cato's surviving spouse at the time, who ran the Mother-in-Law Lounge, said, "Ashlye, but that song ain't even on Ernie's jukebox." It was a song she'd never even heard of. It was like resurrecting a song from the dead. It was a song that he recorded in 1968, and it was called "Here Come the Girls." And we licensed it to Boots, and it became such a sensation in the United Kingdom that we had to, and this is when people are buying DB or paying for digital downloads, right? And still stealing music, right? There was such a demand for physical product. We pressed, I don't know how many CD compact disc compilations. I mean, there was, and it wasn't just of Here Come the Girls. It was of all kinds of New Orleans music. So not only did the estate of Ernie Cato benefit from this transaction, which, by the way, saved the Mother-in-Law Lounge in one fell swoop, but because that estate had the affairs and orders and we were able to transact around that recording, then not only did the estate continue to make money off of all of the music that was sold, but when Desperate Housewives licensed the recording, they got that money. When the Sugar Babes sampled it, when Mariah Carey sampled it, I think Beyonce sampled it, um, we got that money. Now Trombone Shorty is performing it at all of his gigs, and he's making money off of it because people are, just from, the performances. Not that he's making money off of the recording, but the estate's making money off of the license to Trombone Shorty. And, every New Orleans musician who's featured on all these compilations is still getting dollars, metaphorical mailbox dollars just by being included in it. So it's not just benefited the estate, it's benefited the entire community, which is freaking awesome. And so that's what we want to end on, that high note. That's the kind of thing that can happen when your affairs are in order. Not only, are you taking care of yourself? Are you furthering your legacy? Is your story continuing to be told? But you may actually rise up, and the rising tide, raises all ships, right? You may actually help your entire community. I mean, there is the capacity to do that, and other people in your sector. So, if that's not incentive, I don't know what is. Get your shit together.
I love it. Great way to close. This is a work that we're proud of. We do think it's going to be helpful for all communities. A lot of Louisiana law is a little bit more complicated, but there's stuff here that works for everyone, no matter where you are. Of course, seek your own independent legal counsel. Thank you guys so much for joining us. For those of y'all who want to see more, go to our webpage at Ellanola, ELLANOLA.org. You can hit /Rampart, or you can also find it under the services tab, and you can read the guide, you can download the forms, you can see the videos. It's stuff that I think will find helpful to everybody. Ashlye and Elizabeth, thank you guys so much for joining us today. Thank you for all your work on creating this guide and your services to the creators of New Orleans. We can't thank you all enough.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Everybody take care.
Goodbye.